Have you ever walked out of a VA clinic or received that dreaded brown envelope and felt a cold, sinking certainty that the system was fundamentally designed to work against you? That feeling isn't paranoia. It's often the subconscious recognition of a deeply ingrained pattern. Many veterans approach the VA system, whether for healthcare or disability compensation, believing the process is a fair, objective assessment of their service-connected needs. They believe that if the evidence is there, the rating or the care will follow. But the truth, the hard truth that high-retention veterans already know, is that the VA operates on specific, repeatable denial patterns, strategies they employ to minimize liability and manage their immense caseload. If you step back into that clinic or file another claim without understanding these core denial mechanisms, you are essentially setting yourself up for another cycle of frustration, delay, and ultimately rejection. You need to stop viewing your denial as a one-off mistake and start seeing it as a predictable move in a bureaucratic chess game. We are going to expose the 7 most common, most damaging denial patterns that the VA hopes you never catch, the ones that invalidate thousands of claims every single year. Understanding these isn't just about winning your appeal. It's about reclaiming control over your health and your financial future, and it all starts right now with the single biggest reason claims fail. The first and arguably most insidious pattern is what we call the lack of nexus trap. This isn't a simple mistake. It is a calculated failure to connect the dots. A nexus in VA language is the definitive link, the bridge, the medical opinion that states unequivocally that your current disability is directly related to an event, injury, or exposure during your military service. The VA's strategy here is simple. They look for any possible ambiguity, any slight deviation in the medical record, or any gap in time, and they exploit it relentlessly. When you receive a denial letter stating that your claim was denied because a medical nexus has not been established, they are essentially saying, "We acknowledge you are sick, but we don't believe we caused it." This pattern is so effective because veterans often submit exhaustive evidence of their symptoms, years of doctor visits, medication lists, testimonials from family, but they fail to provide the one piece of evidence that truly matters: a clear, concise, and persuasive medical opinion from a qualified professional who has reviewed all the evidence and explicitly stated that the condition is more likely than not service-connected. The VA knows that securing an independent medical opinion, an IMO, is expensive, time-consuming, and often requires navigating the complex world of specialized medical legal experts. They bank on the veteran getting tired, running out of resources, or simply not knowing that their own treating physician's notes, which often focus only on treatment, not causation, are insufficient to establish that crucial nexus. Think about the chronic back pain you have had since that hard landing 20 years ago. You have years of chiropractic records. You have MRIs. The VA examiner reviews your file and notes that while you have degenerative disc disease, the specific medical literature suggests this condition can arise naturally over time, unrelated to trauma. They seize on this possibility, however remote, and issue the denial. The denial letter will be polite, even sympathetic, but it will zero in on that missing nexus statement. The pattern is repeated across every type of claim. Mental health conditions where the stressor event is questioned, orthopedic injuries where the onset date is vague, or chronic illnesses where the exposure link is circumstantial. To break this pattern, you must shift your focus entirely. Stop gathering more symptom evidence and start hunting for that single, unassailable statement of causation. You must understand that the VA's own examiners, the ones they pay, are often instructed, subtly or overtly, to look for ways to disprove the nexus, not to establish it. They will focus on intervening events, lifestyle factors, or pre-service history. If you don't proactively supply a superior independent nexus statement, you are leaving the determination entirely in the hands of the very entity that benefits from the denial. This is the bedrock of the VA denial system, and recognizing it is the first step toward victory. This pattern dictates that the burden of proof is not just on you to show you are hurt, but to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt in their eyes, that the military caused the injury, and they will use every resource available to suggest an alternative explanation, however flimsy. They will use the lack of specific in-service documentation to create doubt, even though they know that documentation standards were often poor, especially decades ago or in deployed environments. The sheer volume of cases that rely on this lack of nexus denial is staggering, cementing it as the foundational bureaucratic shield. Moving swiftly to the second powerful denial pattern, we encounter the infamous C&P exam sabotage. The compensation and pension exam, the C&P, is supposed to be a neutral fact-finding mission, a way for the VA to gather current medical evidence related to your claim. In reality, for many veterans, it becomes a high-stakes adversarial ambush. The VA understands that the C&P examiner's report carries immense weight, often more weight than years of your private medical records, because it is the current official assessment ordered by the decision-makers. The pattern of sabotage manifests in several distinct ways. First, there is the insufficient time maneuver. You wait months for the exam, only to have the examiner spend 7 minutes with you, barely looking up from the screen, asking rapid-fire, closed-ended questions. They are rushing because they are often contractors paid per exam, incentivized by volume, not thoroughness. This insufficient time ensures they miss critical details, overlook nuanced symptoms, and fail to establish rapport, which is essential for accurate assessment, especially in mental health claims. Second, there is the predetermined conclusion trap. Many examiners, whether consciously or subconsciously, enter the exam room having already formed a preliminary opinion based on the often incomplete summaries provided by the VA. They are looking to confirm that preliminary opinion, not to explore the full scope of your disability. They might phrase questions in ways that elicit negative or minimizing answers. For example, instead of asking, "How often does your pain prevent you from working?" they might ask, "Are you able to walk around the house without assistance?" A question designed to minimize the impact of the pain on your overall function. Third, and most damaging, is the failure to address the nexus component. Even if the examiner confirms your diagnosis, they might completely punt on the nexus question, or worse, explicitly state that your condition is less likely than not due to service, often without adequate justification or review of your service treatment records, STRs. The VA relies on the veteran being unprepared for this level of scrutiny. They rely on you being vulnerable, honest, and perhaps minimizing your symptoms because you feel uncomfortable or are trying to appear tough. The pattern is clear. The C&P exam is frequently used as a tool to generate negative medical evidence that justifies a denial, rather than a neutral assessment that supports the claim. If the C&P report concludes that your symptoms are mild or that the condition is not related to service, the VA decision-maker has a ready-made official reason to deny the claim, making it incredibly difficult to overcome without securing a highly detailed rebuttal from an independent medical expert. You must treat the C&P exam not as a friendly doctor's visit, but as a formal deposition where every single word matters and where the goal of the entity conducting the exam is often diametrically opposed to your own. The VA knows that veterans are often intimidated by the medical environment and may struggle to articulate the full severity of their chronic suffering in a brief, high-pressure setting, and this vulnerability is systematically exploited to minimize the reported severity, leading directly to a lower rating or an outright denial. Now, let's dissect the third major denial pattern, the pre-existing condition red herring. This strategy is a highly effective way for the VA to shift the blame entirely off their own shoulders. When a veteran files a claim for a condition, the VA is legally obligated to review the veteran's entire medical history, including records from before they entered service. The pre-existing condition pattern exploits the fact that almost everyone has some minor medical history, even if it was asymptomatic or non-disabling prior to service. The VA's maneuver is to find any mention of a similar symptom, however slight, a prior sprained ankle, a note about childhood anxiety, or a history of minor joint pain, and then argue that your current severe disabling condition is merely the natural progression of that pre-existing issue. They ignore the fact that service aggravated the condition beyond its natural progression, which is a compensable outcome under VA law. They rely on the veteran not knowing the legal distinction between a pre-existing condition and a condition aggravated by service. The denial letter will often state something like, "The evidence shows the claimant had a history of this condition prior to service, and no compelling evidence demonstrates that service permanently worsened the condition." This denial pattern is particularly frustrating for mental health claims. If a veteran had any history of childhood trauma or minor emotional issues, the VA examiner may seize on that history and argue that the severe PTSD or depression manifested during service was merely the culmination of those earlier issues, completely discounting the specific military stressors, combat, trauma, MST, etc., that triggered the disabling phase. They are essentially saying, "You were already fragile, and we aren't responsible for the stress we put you through." To counter this, you must meticulously prove the baseline level of the condition before service, often through entrance physical records or buddy statements, and then demonstrate the permanent worsening caused by service. The VA hopes you won't take the time or have the resources to secure the medical opinion that specifically addresses the legal definition of aggravation, that the service-related trauma caused a lasting, permanent increase in the severity of the disability beyond what would have occurred naturally. This red herring is a bureaucratic sleight of hand designed to dismiss the service connection outright, and it is a tactic that requires a precise, legalistic medical rebuttal to defeat. They will use the slightest evidence of prior complaint to dismiss the severity of current suffering, exploiting the lack of perfect documentation from years or decades past. The fourth pattern is purely administrative, yet devastatingly effective: the failure to follow up deception. This denial pattern is less about medical evidence and more about bureaucratic compliance. The VA system is complex, and the claims process requires the veteran to actively participate in scheduling, attending exams, submitting forms, and responding to requests for information, RFIs. The VA knows that veterans are often dealing with severe medical conditions, financial instability, and mental health struggles, making organization and timely response difficult. The failure to follow-up pattern exploits this vulnerability. The VA will send a request for additional information or notification of a scheduled C&P exam to an outdated address, or bury a crucial deadline within a massive, complex packet of documents. When the veteran misses the deadline or fails to attend the exam, which they never received notice of, the VA issues a denial based on failure to prosecute the claim. This is a clean, quick denial for the VA, requiring no medical review, no complex legal analysis, and no expenditure of resources on a C&P exam. The denial letter simply states that the veteran failed to provide necessary information or attend a required appointment, and the claim is closed. This pattern is particularly insidious because it puts the onus entirely on the veteran to prove they didn't receive the notice or that the VA made an administrative error. While the VA has a duty to assist the veteran, this duty often seems to disappear when administrative compliance is concerned. They rely on the sheer volume of mail and the complexity of the processes to ensure that critical deadlines are missed. To combat this, veterans must adopt a hypervigilant approach to all VA correspondence, confirming receipt of important documents, tracking all mail, and immediately updating their address and contact information through multiple channels. This pattern is a bureaucratic weapon of attrition. They try to wear you down through administrative hurdles, hoping you will simply give up before they ever have to. Evaluate the medical merits of your claim. This strategy saves the VA massive amounts of time and money, proving that sometimes the most effective denial is the one that avoids the medical discussion entirely, using procedural technicalities as the ultimate barrier. Moving on to the fifth denial pattern, we uncover the diagnosis drift maneuver. This pattern is subtle, often requiring a deep understanding of the medical coding systems and the VA's rating schedule. When a veteran files a claim for a specific condition, say chronic severe migraines, the VA or its examiners may intentionally or through negligence misdiagnose or reclassify the condition into a related but less compensable category. For example, the severe disabling migraines might be reclassified as tension headaches, which carry a lower potential rating or are easier to argue are not service-connected. Similarly, severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, might be minimized to adjustment disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. The pattern is to shift the diagnosis away from the highly specific, service-connected, and highly disabling condition toward a more generic, less severe, or more easily attributable to non-service factors condition. Why do they do this? Because the VA rating schedule is precise. A diagnosis of PTSD with certain markers of social and occupational impairment leads to a specific percentage, but a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder with similar symptoms may lead to a significantly lower rating or an outright denial if the anxiety is deemed non-service connected. The diagnosis drift is a way to control the outcome before the rating percentage is even calculated. It happens most often when the C&P examiner, who is not your treating physician, decides to unilaterally change the diagnosis based on their brief assessment. They might look at your records, see a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, but decide that, based on their limited interaction, it is actually just chronic musculoskeletal pain, which is a much harder claim to win. The VA relies on the veteran accepting the C&P examiner's medical authority and not challenging the specific diagnostic codes used. To break this pattern, you must compare the diagnosis listed in the denial letter or C&P report with the diagnosis provided by your long-term treating physician. If there is a discrepancy, you need an independent medical expert to explicitly state that the VA's diagnosis is incorrect and that the proper, more severe, and service-connected diagnosis is the one that applies. This pattern reveals that the VA is not just assessing if you are sick, but actively controlling how sick you are, defined to be minimizing the severity through diagnostic manipulation to save the government money. This subtle change in terminology can mean the difference between a 70% rating and a 10% rating, or worse, between acceptance and denial, making meticulous attention to the precise medical language essential for every step of the process. The sixth denial pattern is the misinterpretation of lay evidence strategy. Lay evidence or lay testimony refers to statements provided by the veteran, family members, friends, or fellow service members, buddy statements describing the onset, severity, and impact of the disability. This evidence is crucial, especially when service treatment records are incomplete or non-existent, which is common for conditions that developed years after service or injuries that occurred in the field without formal reporting. The VA has a legal duty to consider all evidence, including lay evidence. However, the misinterpretation of lay evidence pattern involves minimizing, dismissing, or outright ignoring these statements if they contradict the VA's desired outcome. The denial letter might acknowledge the receipt of the buddy statements, but then dismiss them with vague language like, "While supportive statements were provided, they do not constitute competent medical evidence sufficient to establish a nexus. This is a deliberate misapplication of the law. While lay evidence cannot establish a diagnosis that requires a medical professional, it absolutely can establish the facts of an injury, the onset of symptoms, and the severity of the functional impairment, especially when corroborated by other evidence. The VA relies on the veteran not knowing the legal weight of their own testimony. For example, if a veteran claims PTSD based on witnessing a specific traumatic event and the service records are silent, a buddy statement from someone who witnessed the same event is critical lay evidence. The VA might dismiss this by arguing that the buddy statement is not contemporaneous or not from a medical professional. This is the pattern of denial. They set an impossibly high standard for lay evidence, essentially demanding medical precision from non-medical witnesses, thereby eliminating one of the veteran's most powerful tools for bridging the gap left by missing service records. To defeat this, your lay statements must be incredibly detailed, factual, and specific, describing what, where, and when the event occurred, and the noticeable immediate change in the veteran's behavior or physical condition. You must ensure the statements are not simply emotional pleas, but factual accounts that fill the holes the VA is attempting to exploit. The VA knows that many veterans struggle to ask their friends or family for these detailed, painful accounts, and they rely on the resulting lack of specificity to justify the dismissal of this crucial, non-medical evidence, thereby ensuring the claim fails on the grounds of insufficient documentation. Finally, we arrive at the seventh and most frustrating denial pattern, the duty to assist breakdown. The duty to assist is a fundamental legal obligation of the VA. It means that the VA must make reasonable efforts to help the veteran obtain necessary evidence to support their claim. This includes requesting service treatment records, private medical records, if the veteran provides a release, and scheduling necessary C&P exams. The duty to assist breakdown pattern occurs when the VA fails in this obligation, either through negligence, deliberate inaction, or simply by performing the duty in a superficial way that guarantees failure. This pattern often involves the insufficient search maneuver. The VA might request service records from the National Archives, but only search under the veteran's most recent name or service number, failing to account for name changes, clerical errors, or records filed under a different unit. When the search comes back no records found, the VA denies the claim, stating they fulfilled their duty, but the evidence simply doesn't exist. They rely on the veteran not knowing that they have the right to challenge the adequacy of that search and to demand a more thorough investigation. Another manifestation is the selective request pattern. If the veteran indicates they were treated by a specific private doctor for 10 years, the VA might only request records from the last 6 months, knowing that the full history is required to establish the chronicity or the severity of the condition. When the partial records fail to fully support the claim, the VA denies it, claiming the evidence was insufficient while neglecting to obtain the complete file. This denial pattern is particularly egregious because it leverages the VA's own failure as the reason for the denial. They are effectively saying, "We failed to gather the evidence, and because we don't have the evidence, your claim is denied." The veteran is left fighting not just their disability, but the VA's own internal inefficiency. To overcome this, you must meticulously document every interaction with the VA, every request for records, and every deadline. If you receive a denial based on a lack of evidence, you must immediately review the denial letter to see exactly which records the VA claims to have requested and which ones they received. If you suspect a failure in the duty to assist, you must file an immediate challenge, detailing the specific records they missed and demanding they fulfill their legal obligation. Recognizing this pattern is critical because it shifts the focus from the medical evidence back to the procedural fairness of the VA's handling of the claim, often providing a powerful basis for appeal. They depend on the veteran assuming the VA did its job correctly. Challenging this assumption is often the key to unlocking a successful appeal. These 7 patterns, the lack of nexus trap, the C&P exam sabotage, the pre-existing condition red herring, the failure to follow up deception, the diagnosis drift maneuver, the misinterpretation of lay evidence strategy, and the duty to assist breakdown, are not random occurrences. They are the systemic architecture of denial within the VA system. Each one is designed to create a legitimate-sounding reason to reject a claim, shift the burden of proof, or wear down the veteran through procedural complexity. If you have been denied, go back to that denial letter right now and look for the fingerprints of these patterns. Did they focus entirely on the missing link? Was the C&P exam brief and hostile? Did they suddenly change the name of your diagnosis? Your next move, your next visit to the clinic, your next filing must be informed by this knowledge. Stop reacting to the denial and start anticipating the pattern. The VA system is not inherently malicious, but it is bureaucratic, overworked, and incentivized to conserve resources, and these patterns are the tools they use to achieve that goal. The only way to consistently win is to shift your mindset from a passive claimant hoping for fairness to an active, informed participant who understands the rules of their game better than they do. You must proactively supply the nexus statement, meticulously prepare for the C&P exam as if it were a trial, preemptively provide evidence to refute the pre-existing condition argument, track every piece of correspondence, ensure your diagnosis is correctly coded, provide detailed, factual lay evidence, and hold the VA accountable for every failure in their duty to assist. Do not visit that VA clinic again. Do not file another claim until you have internalized these 7 denial patterns. Your fight is not just against your disability. It is against a predictable, structured system of bureaucratic resistance. Knowledge is your armor, and preparation is your weapon. Take control of the narrative, expose the pattern, and secure the benefits you earned and deserve.